story of how I got to know you.
Yeah.
So you were the shining example of this course I took.
Little did I know. Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, you were the first, and you're like, I was like, oh, maybe this person took the class too. It turns out you didn't. So
No.
it's David Spirell writing course, and he was talking about how to write a good bio, and then went into yours, and then there's actually a lot of nuance. I want to dig into that a little bit too.
Sure, yeah.
And there's also a lot of meat in there, and basically David just said that, wow, no, look at this girl's 26 and she's doing all this
25
cool...
now.
20,
Yeah, no,
yeah, I'm sorry,
26. No, that's okay. No, it's all good. Almost 26. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, they even better, right? And so I reached out and I was like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And thank you for accepting the invitation. So I kind of want to know, like, how do you make, because I look at my website and I look at yours. Mine looks like shitty as shit. And then yours looks great. So how can like my blog look as beautiful as yours?
I think for me, I've had a couple people ask this, and people are like, I had someone the other day say, you know, it looks like you've been coding for years. Like, how did you create this like personal website? I think for me, it's all been like constant iteration. If you saw the first version of my personal website, it was crap. Like it really was.
The first version is 2000, because I went back to look at the first version.
Yeah.
At 2018.
Yeah, it's last year, exactly. But I'm constantly adding to it. Like even just every couple weeks, I'll change something. So recently I added like a 50 countries thing, where it's like all the countries that I've been to, and there's like one single picture from each country. Then maybe next week I'll add something else, like I have a book section that I added that wasn't part of the first version of the page. So it's just about like constantly, like every week or every other week, I'll think, oh, what do I want to add to this? And then it's like kind of spiraled into what it is now, but it wasn't always like that, so as you saw.
Yeah, so it's a static page, is that right?
So the website's actually run on Node, but the actual main page, which I think is the one you're talking about, that could be a static page. Like I don't like plug that into a database or anything.
Interesting. So it's like, I mean, that itself, well, we can go into a whole rabbit hole about what Node is, because I have no idea, because I just run on WordPress and Well, what's nice is that because, so it doesn't need to be run on Node. Node's just like a back-end language, but I do think it's been helpful that it's coded not through like a third-party site, like it's not through WordPress, not through Squarespace. So I have complete control over exactly how I want it to look. If I want to add a section, it's a lot easier for me to do that, I think, than if you're kind of working against a different processing system. Right. Okay, well, so why did you choose Node, and how did it sort of look the way it is right now? Because it looks so different from all the other sites that at least blogs, right? Because I would put it in the bucket. Because like the top and the sizing and the navigation bar and the little, subscribe to my newsletter thing pop up at the bottom right hand corner, it looks so vastly different. So, well, how did that end up to be like that?
I wish so I'm not a designer, like I would have, it's important to say, like, so my actual blog, so the blog page looks different than like my homepage. The blog page is like, the blog page I can't take credit for, that's Ghost. Ghost I would totally recommend for anyone, but my personal page, I'm not a designer, so a lot of people, they go and they like design a page and then they go actually like implement it in various ways. I just code. I just go and say, hey, like I want this to kind of look like this, and I'll just kind of start working with it. So that's probably why it doesn't look like many other sites. It's because it's me just kind of like iterating or designing on the fly. But yeah, it's like it's just been me kind of thinking, what do I want this to look like? And as you've seen, it's kind of like changed over time.
There's nothing. Well, how do you even want this to look like that? Have you seen something like that in the first place? Because I think our process is so vastly different. Because for me, I would look at maybe 3 websites that I think are like great looking, and then I'll be like, okay, well, I want this piece of that and that piece of that, and I'll piecemeal it together.
I think everyone does that. I can't I'm not some like visionary. Like most of my stuff probably comes from me seeing something equivalent on other sites. I do actually have like a running list on Evernote of just like every time I see a site that I think is like really cool or nice or like distinct in some way, I'll add it to that list. And every so often, if I'm like like itching for inspiration, then I'll like go back there and be like, oh, these are, and I'll label them. I'll be like simplistic sites, like kind of like.
We need to geek out about that. Okay, well, tell me how you capture it.
Well, yeah. So it's just, I mean, it's, if anyone saw my Evernote, it's not clean. it's not organized, but it has a lot of info. And for that particular one, I'll organize it as like just like, again, simplistic sites, like sites that are really like kind of like full of animations, or like really kind of like new age sites, or like blogs or sites.
So do you use tags, or like do you tag it?
It's just literally a text file that has like a list of different sites.
Like, so you create a note and then simplistic site, they add a link to it. You don't even capture like the PDF of that site.
No. I'll just go back to it if I'm like, hey, I want to see, or like sometimes I'll do it by color scheme. Like if I want to go back, I want to see a site that I think is really nice with like a pastel color scheme. I'll go back to, like maybe the 5 to 10 links that I have from that and get inspiration.
Right. Well, what if it's like simplistic plus pastel plus animation? How do you like?
Well, it's kind of whatever I'm like trying to get inspiration for. And like I said, I'm not very like scientific about my approach to designing. It's like, it's just like
it's just different. So I'm just like, how do you?
And it's really, I think maybe the difference is that because I'm building it iteratively, like most people are like, okay, I want to build a landing page. It needs like these blocks, right?
Right.
The way I build my site is I've built it kind of just like a simplistic page at first, and then every time I want to add some sort of feature or element, like a books page or like, a page with my pictures, I'll think just about that. Where do I want to put this? Where do I want to insert it? Like, and I'll just, so it's not really about designing a page from scratch. It's about just adding in things like as they come to be. So I think maybe that's why it looks a little different than,
Right. Okay, so like what is the genesis of the page? And because you started only like a year ago, like what sort of like kicked you into wanting to have a blog in the first place?
So the first like personal page was launched sometime last year, and it was a way for me to practice my coding skills. So like one of the things I really encourage when people are learning to code, because it was so helpful for me, is to like build things along the way. Because if not, it's kind of like you're, the equivalent of like you're learning a spoken language and you never get to practice it. So I just used it as like an opportunity. Okay, like I need to build something. I've just learned HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript, and that really, it was a static page at first, the original version, because that's all I knew. And so it was just a way for me to like, hey, I want to build something, I want to like use my skills. And then that kind of evolved as I started like launching things and people getting attention. Then I was like, okay, I should have kind of like a go-to page where people can learn about me. Like, there's a lot of, I added an FAQ because people were asking questions, and I just wanted a page where people could go. It's like, I want to learn about Steph, this is where you can go. And then the blog is a whole nother story.
Okay. So would you say that like because yours ended up in not WordPress, because it's really like two different buckets, right? WordPress and the rest. It's because you took on this coding, you see as a coding project, not as like you just want to make a blog.
Yeah, I think WordPress is great, and there's other tools similar to WordPress, but I think I wanted it to be like a platform that I could completely like manage and design and just create myself over time too. Because the thing about WordPress is it's great at first, right? Because it lets you build something super quick, especially if you don't know how to code. It's like you can create a beautiful page very quickly, but from there, if you want to, make some small tweak or add in a section that isn't part of that template, it's very difficult, right? So I wanted it to be a place where it's like, this isn't like a 30-second thing or like a 30-minute thing. I wanted to be able to like be like my homepage forever and be able to like manipulate it how I needed to for years.
Right. So what are what's the decision process looks like, and what are the couple of options that have like came out as you make the decision to make it a node or build a node?
So that was Node specifically was just because that's where I actually learned to like, that's the language, the backend language that I learned to code in.
Okay, well, wait, can you expand a little bit on Node? Because I'm like, now I look like an idiot.
No, it's okay. So there's, with any kind of website or web application, there's typically a front end and a back end. Mm-hmm. So front end is like what you see, right? Like simplified, but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is normally in the front end. And then normally there's a back end, which ties into your database. And like, if it's not a static site, that's actually like, doing any API calls or doing any asynchronous calls. And so there's many backend languages. There's Node, Python. You've probably heard of them. C#.
Right.
Like
so
all of
Node
those are
is
backend
a
languages.
Language.
It's a backend language. It's JavaScript though. It's
Okay.
like Node.js. It's a backend language, and there's basically all the backend languages. Like the fundamentals are the same. So you don't need to. Node isn't necessarily better or worse than Python or C# or other PHP. A lot of people use PHP as well. I just took a course that used Node, and that's like why I use it for my site.
Right. So all along I was thinking that Node was a CMS, which is kind of like WordPress, but actually Node is actually a coding.
No, so my entire site, with the exception of the blog, which is on Ghost, is like completely hosted, developed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me break it down. So Node is the language, and okay, the domain you got it from.
So initially from GoDaddy, but now I'm on Namecheap. Doesn't matter though.
Right.
Yeah.
Recommend Namecheap because they don't spam you.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I definitely would recommend Namecheap over GoDaddy.
And hosting?
Hosting, so for the actual, most of my applications, they're hosted through Heroku, but my blog is through DigitalOcean.
Okay, and reason?
Well, just because DigitalOcean actually has a droplet that makes it very easy to sync with Ghost or launch a blog through Ghost.
Oh.
Heroku makes it very easy to deploy through through Node or through certain applications that I use.
Okay, so before that it was like Heroku until you wanted to add Ghost, and then you move it to DigitalOcean.
Well, so everything is still on Heroku, but then just the blog part is on DigitalOcean.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and what is Heroku?
Heroku is similar. It's like basically Heroku helps you serve up your sites, right? So you're basically paying for website hosting. Okay. Similar to if you buy a domain through GoDaddy or Namecheap, sometimes they'll actually provide you with hosting. Yeah. But this actually connects directly to my IDE, which is my development environment, and I can launch directly through Heroku. And then that connects to my domain, and then my website is served.
Okay, so interesting. So, because my version is Namecheap plus a hosting service, which for me is a bunch of hard disks at some place around the world that connects to the internet. So your data gets stored in the hard disk, and it gets read by the browser.
Heroku is like the equivalent of that. And same with DigitalOcean. It's just integrated directly into your development environment. It makes it much easier versus, like, I'm sure when you, if you're doing like a static site or something through like WordPress, I'm so sure you're connected to cPanel, right? You're like dropping files in, maybe depending on. So mine instead is like I just use like terminal commands, and it sends.
So you don't have cPanel.
I'm not sure from a purely technical perspective if Heroku uses cPanel, but I just go directly to Heroku. Like I just deploy directly to Heroku.
Interesting. Yeah. So Heroku replaces the cPanel and the cPanel and it's also a hosting hard disk somewhere. So
all of these sites will have like physical servers somewhere, right? Like okay. So same as like they're all doing the same thing. Right. It's just certain sites or like certain tools like Heroku or DigitalOcean set up the infrastructure in different ways that I think are more conducive as a developer to actually deploy your code.
Oh, okay. Okay, so basically I could in my same server set up Heroku. Is it correct? Or
I've never tried to set up a static site with Heroku, but I think you could. I'm not 100% sure about that. So.
No. I'm saying if I could install Heroku. It's like an app of sort that the way it configures the hard disk.
I don't know.
Okay. No. Sure, honestly, yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. Cool. There's a lot of things. So no CMS then. The CMS is Ghost. Would you say so? Like.
Well, not all parts of my site have like what you would typically call CMS. Ghost is the CMS for the blog.
Right.
I don't know if I would say that my site itself has like a CMS because there's no content management system. Right. It's all coded like directly.
That's right. How do you choose colors? Because like what befuddled me is that I go into your site and it has this beautiful color that like works together, I mean, mine is just black and white.
Sometimes that works. It's simple. Yeah. Again, I wish I was, I'm not a designer, so I'm not like very scientific about it. I know I've really, like, even the way I dress, and like I've always been kind of more of like a pastel color scheme type person, like in most of the things that I do. So that's why if you go to my site, it's mostly like pastels. That was like where I wanted to start. And then from there, it's literally just like, you know, color picker, iterating. Even last night, I was changing something on my site and I was debating changing the color scheme, but I didn't because I was like, this works, I should keep it the same. But it really wasn't scientific. It was more like, let me work around this until I think it works.
That's interesting. So even for font size the photo.
No, I wish I had more of like a better answer where it's like, oh, I really thought about this and I, you know, like use this ratio scheme. No, it was very like, because I code on the, I'm kind of designing it on the fly. I just kind of see if I think it looks good.
Yeah, and your code and then that's the actual.
Well, the good thing about, again, like being able to code with like Node or basically like something that you're developing it directly and you're not using a system like WordPress, is that you can make tiny changes and then you can just see it in your like kind of staging link and see like basically, oh, do I like that? No, let me just like reverse that. And so it's very iterative where you can just like code, check, no, I like this or I don't.
I wonder what is better now, because actually, so the setup I'm using right now is at least the blog. Well, like let's talk about my 2D animation site, because I use this plugin called Elementor. And
I have some friends who use that as well, yeah.
And you can see it like right away almost. Yeah. So like from a speed point of view, and to be able to see it, like which do you think, you know, do someone need to invest the time to learn Node? And
no one needs to learn to code. I'm of the opinion that in the long run, it's like the right option, because there's only so much that you can do with no code, and no code's advancing super quickly, so that's something to keep in mind. But I just think like I'm able to iterate so quickly just by like knowing exactly not just how it would look in something like Elementor, but like how this will actually be developed and integrate into the rest of the website. I just think that in learning to code, like you're not just learning like how to create something, but how things work, how to work with other developers. And it's just a much more long-term solution. If someone tells me, hey, there's like a small bug on your site, I can just wake up and fix it myself. I don't need to ask someone to do it. I don't need to troubleshoot for hours. One of my best friends was coding a site or putting together a site recently, and there was just very simple things that he spent hours on because he didn't know like the basic technical knowledge that, you know, he had like a 5-minute conversation with me and it was solved. So it's not just about like creating, and I'm not even like very experienced with development compared to most people, but that's why I really do think it's important for most people to just like learn the basics. You don't need to learn Node, you don't need to learn a back-end language, but just like learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, learn how the web works, because so much of what people use is on the web.
Right, no, I do have the opinion, and I stand by with you on the same thing as, you know, like learning how to code, learning how to talk to machine is the modern day math and the modern day read and write.
Yeah, it is.
Right? And if you are building a site, then why don't you use that as a project to learn about coding instead of like learning about coding through a school which have very stable environment? Well, you go in the real world and go try.
And like it's so fun and actually like very empowering to be able to. I think a lot of people. I mean, learning anything at first is hard, not just code. Like I think people forget that, right? You get out of school and you aren't learning, you know, as frequently anymore, and so anytime you try to pick up anything, it's like such a heavy lift at first. So people forget that like learning anything at first is like very tough. But most people that I've kind of talked to or people who have chosen to learn to code, yes, the first couple of weeks is like really hectic, but then after that people actually really like the ability to, you can just create stuff. Like there's very few things or skills that you can learn where you can just create things out of nowhere.
Well, because try to see it from your point of view, also because you were working with people who know how to code, so you don't spend 5 hours on GitHub not knowing a single thing and just like squinting your eyes at the screen and I have personally went through that, right?
Everyone has.
No, but at least like would you say that because like you have a group of people that at least understand the thing can point you in the right direction of like.
I mean, most of what I did in terms of learning to code was from a course. It wasn't from like my friends teaching me or saying like, hey, you should learn this. And then after the course, it was mostly just Google. And if you ask any developer, really almost any developer, especially if they didn't go, get like a computer science degree, they're learning on the fly. They don't really fully know what they're doing. They're Googling stuff. They're figuring things out. But it's kind of fun because you're just like constantly problem solving. But I think most people who choose to learn to code will say the first section is very, very hard. And it continues to be hard. But there's this like moment where things start to click. And it's very empowering to be like, wow, this like black box that once existed in my life for many people, right? You okay, like see a website. Okay. You don't know like what's powering this, like how is this actually working? And when that starts to click and when you realize like I can create this stuff too, it's like super empowering. Okay, so wait,
let's just put an insert here. The course that you took, was it Udemy?
It was a Udemy course. It was the Web Developer Bootcamp by Colt Steele. I think like hundreds of thousands of people have taken it.
Is there a group of people that takes it with you that you could talk to about your problems? It's like vent to them.
Yeah, so actually as part of the course, I never really used this feature, but I think many people do. He set up kind of like a chat room where people can say or ask questions and get help. But then there's also a forum in Udemy where you can search, like many people run into the same problems as they do a course. And so that was helpful for me. I used the forum many times. And then since then, I've set up like a small chat where some of those people are people learning to code and some of them are taking that particular course. But in general, I think the forum is actually like forum plus Google is pretty sufficient to get someone through the course.
Okay, what is the longest time you have spent on a problem just trying to know like...
Oh my gosh, hours. Like so many. I always say or tell the one story of one night. So Mongo is like the database that they teach in the course. And so I spent literally around 4 hours trying to troubleshoot something. It just like, I think my data just like wasn't being read or something like that. This is like a year ago now, but I was there for hours. I like eventually just like closed my laptop, went to bed. It was like 3 a.m. or something. And I just needed to restart the database. Like the next morning I restarted the database, like restarted my application and it worked. And I was like, are you kidding me? I just spent 4 hours and this is like definitely not the only time. I've spent many like long segments trying to just like figure something out, banging my head against the wall. And then the great thing about code though is like, honestly, you always do figure it out. You just keep Googling, so you ask someone.
This is where we differ. Because if I were to spend anything more than half an hour on a problem, I'm like, I'm going to throw my computer out of the water, right?
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely like an outlier. I mean, if every day really was like you're banging your head against the wall for 4 hours, that would not be very enjoyable. But I think...
No, but you could sit there with the problem and you know, like chip at it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm literally staring at the screen being like, what the hell for 4 hours. You're Googling it, you're testing different things, and like you're manipulating your code. And then sometimes it'll work, but you'll get a new error message. And then you're like, oh, what does that error message mean? You Google that, you try to figure it out. But you're learning along the way. And the few times where I've had like, where it's been that bad, where it's been like many hours, I will never forget that particular solution again.
So there is like new problems to the old problems as you put something in.
Yeah, I was just in...
So it's not like a single error message that pops up for 4 hours.
No, normally you're like, you're getting different error messages. Like you solve one and then maybe something new pops up. Like I was just in like kind of like a group coding thing last week, and one of the guys was so happy to just get a new error message because he's like, I've been getting this one error message for so long, and this other guy helped him get to a new error message, and he's like, I'm so happy with that, thank you, man, like I can take it from here. But yeah, it's like the, I guess, psychology, like I'm getting somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It would be very, very kind of like daunting to just face the same thing for 4 hours, but you're kind of working through it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, no, I wonder, because, so you took some hard sciences, when you were studying too. Yeah. I wonder if that helps in, just digging at the same problem versus, I don't go to school, so, I'm, of the instant gratification generation.
I mean, maybe. So I do think, like, I took chemical engineering. I think that probably did help me, I can't lie. But I do know many other people who have taken arts, or even there are quite a few young people these days who have no college degree, who went straight into, like, self-taught programming, and they're killing it. So I think it certainly can help, but I think the misconception is that, like, people think, like, math is actually hard. Like, I remember I loved math growing up and, like, throughout university, but math is very hard because it's very conceptually daunting. But programming is, like, kind of like just live problem solving. So a lot of people don't realize it's not math. It is similar in some aspects to math or science, but it's a lot more creative, and it's a lot more kind of like just problem solving on the fly. And so I think that's why you really do see so many people who really struggled with math and science, in their earlier careers, and then thought computer science is not for me, I can't do this, and then eventually get into it and realize, like, wow, this is actually, like, I can do this.
Yeah, and I think one of the conversations I want to explore with you a little bit is, there's people stepping in instead of, like, jumping straight into a 4 hours problem that they look at the same error message. Is there, like, a way to, baby step it? And, like, what would be, and of course, everyone can say it's so easy, this, that, the other, right? Yeah. But then, like, we all know that every online course, there's a 90% dropout rate.
Yeah, so that's the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle for people learning to code is, I think, very different than what people initially imagine. So a lot of people think, like, this is going to be way too technical, I'm not going to understand. And really the biggest hurdle is just people sticking with it, right? So anyone, like, if anyone codes for 1 hour every single day for a year, I guarantee that person will, like, be, like, a sufficient developer by the end of that year. Will they be a senior level developer? No, but, like, will they understand code and be able to create things? Yes. And that's basically what I did. So I was working full time. I spent not every day, but probably, I think it ended up being, like, over 100 days in 2018 coding. And it ranged from, like, 15 minutes some days to, like, a couple hours. But the idea is that, like, I stayed consistent, and I was like, I don't care if some days it's 4 hours where I'm banging my head against the wall, and some days, like, everything flows, like, super freely. But the difference is that I stuck to it, and that's what I try to encourage for people. Set, like, a daily goal. That's all you need to do. Set a goal. I'm going to code for half an hour every day, or I'm going to code for an hour every other day, and you will figure out how to code. That's the difference between, like, people who end up learning to code and who don't, is just people sticking with it.
So I think maybe a better way for people to learn how to code is have a project that's not time sensitive, like a blog, and give yourself 100 days of an hour a day.
Yeah.
And make sure
there are like 100-day, 300-day challenges, and I think they're great because it's not about like forcing it, down your brain until you figure it out, right? It's about just, like, consistently sticking with it. And I think, like you said, it's really important to have projects, because if you don't have things that you actually build with it, it'll just feel like this conceptual thing that you're learning that you'll never put into practice.
Yeah, no, because I think one of my problems is definitely when, I have a project that's rushed, I kind of want to get this out and look a certain way. Yeah. And, like, when I couldn't get it, I'm just like, I'm going to pay money and solve my problems and not learn the skill.
Yeah, and it's okay to pay other, like...
No, 100%. But I think it is, like, to note that if this is something that you want to learn, then give yourself a long stretch of time and like, exercise it out. Instead of, like, I need to lose 7 kg by my wedding day, which is a month away.
Right. And the other thing is, like, I think people kind of or hinder themselves by comparing themselves to people who have been doing it for, like, a decade, right? So you think, like, oh, I want to learn to code, and then you compare yourself to someone who's been, a senior level developer who can create these beautiful sites, but they've been doing it for 7 years, right? Like, that's crazy. If you were learning a spoken language, you would never be like, oh, I'm just learning Spanish, let me go compare myself to, like, a native Spanish speaker. That would make no sense. But I think people need to be, like, patient with themselves and not expect that they're going to be able to build, like, an enterprise level site in 3 months, right? They're going to be able to create, like, a basic site. And like we were talking about my site earlier, if you look at the early stages of it, it wasn't as nice as it is now. And hopefully in a year, it'll be even nicer. And so people just need to not kind of, like, get their expectations too high where they are comparing themselves to something that's unattainable, and then they give up, right?
Yeah. Also, I think that like if the website is what they're making, perhaps they're also conflating design skills together with coding skills, and that adds another layer on top of it that makes it even harder. So if and how I did it was that, I go look at sites that I want, and then I sketch it out on a paper of okay, this are the features I want, and this is how the layout is going to be. Yeah. Then take that thing to put it on the website with the framework, then code it, and that's a more efficient way of learning coding than actually adding the design element on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own process, but I think the idea is just when people first learn to code, they have these very conflated visions of what they'll be able to do in a month of work. But coding is it's an entire practice, right? You're not gonna become a professional coder in a month. No, so yeah. People need to be patient with that and
what
develop
we're trying to
their
do is
own.
to learn the middle ground, right? Of on one hand, you're coding is so easy.
It's not. It's not easy, but I think it's easier than people think if they focus on kind of the idea of consistency when they're learning it.
Okay, so a better selling point is coding is going to be the math and the writing. Eventually, if you want to work at high leverage job, get high pay, that's one of the skills that will value add into any of your resume throughout, and being able to talk to developers is good skills nonetheless. Yeah. So if you need to find a project to get going, take a time 1 year, and this is a skill that you will build over time.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that's the long-term sell is important, right? I'm 20-something, even if someone's 40-something, there's still many years left of their life, right? And imagine how quickly technology is advancing. You're basically with every sequential year getting kind of more out of society, right? And what society's capable of doing, what jobs are out there, what people are focusing on. And I think it's just a long-term thing that even if someone doesn't want to be a full-time developer, I'm not a full-time developer, it's important to have those basic skills, and it's a long-term play. You're investing in your ability to basically contribute and be part of a future technological society.
And if I'm at a job doing nursing, right? Do you think so I have two options. A great way might be to be a project manager at a tech company, or nurse in the day and learn a course at night. Which do you think would be have a higher probability of learning how to code?
It's hard to say. I mean, and it also depends what someone wants. I mean, in terms of just purely high probability of someone getting through it, of course, if it's their job and they're a project manager, they're going to learn more through that. But you don't need to, if you're a nurse, you don't need to stop being a nurse. I just think I encourage people to add this skill set to whatever they're doing. You don't need to actually do a 180, right? I still work in marketing. I still love marketing. And
no, but you're doing marketing in a tech environment
of course.
Tech people.
But I think it's important that people don't need to drop what they're doing to learn technology. 100%. I think technology is just becoming more present in our world, and people should kind of take that as a cue to learn some of those skills. But we still need nurses, we still need doctors, we still need architects, and I don't think people should drop that. I think it's just something to augment what they're currently doing so that they understand this tech world, because a lot of people find it a little daunting because they don't understand that people are saying automation's going to steal our jobs, blah, 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 and they don't know what that...
Not true.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. It's not true, but when you are completely sheltered from the world of technology, it's very easy for you to be overwhelmed by this big black box.
Right.
So I guess the simplest way for me to say it is I think people should turn this big black box into not a black box for them.
Yeah, and I'll also say that even if you're a nurse, right, as in you're in the medical field, and if you do want to learn coding, there is always medical apps out there that if someone have the empathy of being a nurse, works with doctor, then
it's a great point.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing is that there's a whole history behind this, but there's this very specific archetype when you think of a developer And that kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy because those people hire people like them. And I think, in the future world of technology, we need more people who have diverse backgrounds. And that's why it's important for us to not just say, hey, like anyone who specifically only wants to be a developer can be a developer. Like you can be a nurse, you can be...
Yeah, and do you think like 2019, the architect, like what is the, is it still like that? Because I do find that there's a lot of people like speaking up,
It's definitely better in the sense of there's more awareness around it. Yeah. I haven't looked at the data recently, but from what I understand, like not much is moving in terms of the numbers, but at least the awareness is there. More people are kind of welcoming others into the industry, and at least people are talking about it. So I do think it's moving in the right direction. Hopefully we'll just see the awareness turn into like actual numbers in terms of the diversity of people in the industry.
And so one of the topics that got brought up was about being a female and going into one of those developer conference, and then people looking, oh, are you HR,
I've definitely had that stuff happen before, like many times. And I also like I'm quite young and like a woman, and so I don't really get the benefit of the doubt often. I think that's the best way to say it. When you enter a room, especially a room that's like filled with a bunch of males, or like a developer conference, people do sometimes assume like, oh, like she's like, here to do marketing, or she's setting up the conference or something. So I've definitely had encounters like that. Granted, I have also had encounters where people just, ask like, what do you do? Like, you're a developer? Like, what do you code in? So I think it is getting better, and more people are kind of coming around to the idea that there's more diversity in the industry. But this is what I mean, that there's still kind of a ways to go, because those encounters or interactions do definitely still happen.
How do you feel when people like ask you that question or assume that you do?
I mean, it's not a good feeling, obviously, but it's also like...
No, but how? Like...
So I'm a very competitive person, and it bothers me for the reason that it's...
The mouse scholarship that you have on LinkedIn.
No, yeah, but I, like, it like, you as a person, whether you're a woman or not, you want to basically kind of enter a room or enter a conversation or an industry or a job like on an equal playing ground, right? Where you get the benefit of the doubt unless you lose it, right? Whereas with many interactions that I've had as a woman, it's the opposite, right? You need to earn that. And so as a competitive person, it really like kind of fuels me to want to like prove that I am X, Y, Z. Yeah, exactly. But what I think is unfortunate is that, so in my case, just like my unique wiring, it kind of like fuels me to step up and say, hey, like I should be here. But I think in many other cases, it actually is like very detrimental. It's detrimental in general, but for some other people who have, maybe it actually just like makes them want to step away, right? Instead of show up. And it shouldn't be like that, right? Like women or other minorities or anyone in general shouldn't have to earn the benefit of the doubt. That should be a given. And then if you do something, regardless of your background, your ethnicity or whatever, to lose that, that's your own doing. But people shouldn't have a different kind of path or distance to tread.
Yeah. No, that's really an interesting like conversation for another day, because yeah, I mean, I'm on the camp of like that life is not fair.
Of course.
But at the same time, people should be given equal opportunity. But I do not know whether if people, like stereotyping a certain stereotype, because we do learn from stereotype, is not giving an opportunity.
Yeah, so the difference, so I think I'm pretty sure I learned this from a Naval podcast, but it's the difference between equal opportunity and equal outcome, right? So a lot of people are fighting capitalism and similar structures because they're like, life isn't fair. This isn't fair. Someone has more money than me. Someone has a better house than me, a better job, whatever. That shouldn't, in my opinion, my personal opinion, that's not the issue, because you are never going to have equal outcome. There's always going to be differences in like how people operate in life. But ideally you have equal opportunity, which means like there's a level playing field, and it depends how much people take advantage of that playing field, how much people step up to the plate, how much people invest in themselves and society and building value, right? And if they do that, ideally the system grants them like a better outcome, right? So it is, I think, fundamentally flawed. The system is flawed if there's not equal opportunity, because that means people are basically set up.
And so, do you think that because of the stereotype, you actually get more opportunity, or you actually have less of an opportunity?
I mean, I still think it's less of an opportunity. Some people would obviously argue that because there's scholarships and grants and, you know, all these things to level the playing field. And I know that's a complete other topic, but I think...
But do you feel like...
I still fundamentally feel as a woman that I get less opportunity than my male counterparts. However,
how does it surface for you?
In the right direction. In some of the discussions we already had, like where people, there's just, I think, a lot more to prove, whether it's in a job interview, whether it's in a job itself, whether I'm meeting someone and like I need to kind of convey like what I do, and they just automatically assume like that I'm doing something else. So it's very subtle, and I think it's hard to convey because it's the same as if you're talking not just like for women but other minorities, where it's like it's hard for them to truly convey their experience because it's an experience. It's not a fact, it's not a data point all the time. But I do think that there is still a gap, but like we've said, I think it's improving, and I think many people are recognizing this and kind of helping to close that gap.
Yeah, and also that I'm definitely in the ignorant part of the camp, because I'm always like, well, what do? You know, like, well, whoever that is in front of me, right? But there might be, you know, the other, and I was just wondering if, next time if you do notice or certain particular things or like scenarios, I'd love to have some of that example so I could be aware of myself, and also other people can be aware. Because once you point it out, then people are self-aware enough to be like, oh shit, I'm doing that. Let's, you know, reverse. Yeah.
And that's super important that, you know, I think a lot of people are kind of stepping up to say, hey, like this, you know, this wasn't cool, or I think maybe you could approach this another way. And it's really positive if the person is willing to listen. And I think more people are willing to listen these days, which is good.
Can I segue that a little bit and, you know, touch on a little bit of leadership thing?
Sure, yeah.
Because this is an interesting conversation, right? Like, you know, like if someone do something that is not the way it should be done in your books, how does the conversation get brought up? When does it get brought up? And you know, how long a time you should set this up, and, you know, like how should the conversations...
As a leader, if someone you're leading is
not... I mean, let's just not even put it as an employee, but you go to a conference and maybe it's not you that got, you know, but you saw someone else that, you know, got that treatment that you think is like not cool. Yeah. How do you know, like navigate that?
It's difficult, and there's not necessarily like a one size fits all response, but I think it's about like, one, assuming best intentions always, because that's when you start to get into bad situations, when you're calling someone out and like, it becomes like a hostile situation. But it's mostly just like, you know, assume the best intentions, just go to the person individually, whether it's online or not, and just explain to them like why that maybe would have been perceived as you know, something negative, and explaining like how maybe they could improve, but again, not approaching it as like I think you had this intention, therefore you're a bad person, blah blah blah. It's like, no, just, hey, heads up, this might have been perceived in a certain way, and if they turn it into a hostile situation...
Do you ask an inviting question beforehand, before giving that?
I don't know if I've thought about this through in like a very scientific way, but I think it's...
Oh no, just something I geek out about. So.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's just more about like just letting the person know this is perceived in that way, because anyone, like whether you're like a woman or a man or from whatever background, has biases, and like I sometimes probably do things that I don't realize but probably don't want to do. So I would actually appreciate if I, you know, did something that was like not cool, if someone told me, hey, like I know you probably didn't intend to do this, but this is how it was perceived. So as long as like we have more people who are willing to be like, oh, I didn't realize that I did that. I should like keep that in mind for next time. Then we're all like working to improve.
Oh my God, it just sparked up so many ideas that came into my head. No, because I like to replay conversations like that, because then I'll be like, okay, well because there will be future conversations that's gonna be like that. You know, you run into situations, and then how would I do differently? And then I'm like, maybe I'll do this. And so as you're talking about it, a couple of things that came up for me was, and I did it just now, and I just insert when you say something, I said, not true.
No, I mean it's good to have like these like debates. It's just
and also another thing I do is, oh, maybe what you're trying to say is this way, but and then assume the best intention. Is another thing I do. Yeah, but anyway.
But I think it's really good to kind of like, I need to do this. Everyone needs to do this. Just like, reflect on like how we all interact, but also take just like if someone's giving you feedback. And I'm not talking about this situation, I'm just talking about in general, like if someone gives you feedback, I think people like their automatic defense is to get very defensive. And I think it's really important. I've learned this especially over the last couple of years, like you're only going to improve through like pretty honest feedback or like, you know, reflection. So it's actually like you're kind of helping someone, and people need to just recognize that like if they're getting feedback, they should at least digest it in like a.
No, I do think that there are certain words, questions, scripts to use to not even engage that hostile, like defensive thing, even to start with, right? And if I do find that, it will definitely be a blog post one of these days. No, because Tim Ferriss like does a good job at that. Sometimes not the best, like his recent book, Tribe of Mentors. He actually put in the script of how people turn people down, like great. And I like copy it and put it on my Evernote.
That's the thing. Nothing needs to be like this big situation. I was even listening to Patty McCord's book, Powerful. She's she's like one of the people who put together that big Netflix culture deck. And she talks about how like, so she's fired a bunch of people. And you know, firing people isn't always about like this huge like disastrous event. It's sometimes like just not the exact right role, and there's just better opportunity elsewhere, or something's changed at the company or whatever. And she was explaining how she does it in a way where she like becomes friends and like mentors with people she's letting go, and she creates like very like positive relationships that like withstand that breakup per se, right? Where she'll like go to, you know, she'll be like at a meeting at Apple, and one of her ex-employees will have moved on to Apple, and they'll like hug each other, and you know, the person she's at the meeting with will be like, how do you know each other? And she's like, well, I let her go a couple years ago. And it's just like this weird dynamic that most people aren't.
Want to also insert that she's very artful. One of the hardest problem is people problem.
Yeah.
And I think she just makes it look easy.
None of this stuff is easy, of course. Right. But I think it's people just, I think, you know, label certain interactions as like negative or positive, but they don't need to be that way. I think people just like in general, like if more people are open to feedback and also this concept that we're not all perfect, like on both ends, then I think a lot of interactions go a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, no, I agree on that 100%. And I'm a terrible leader, number one. So I got a lot to learn on that. Actually, so I'm going back a little bit. Okay, so you mentioned ghosts.
Ghosts.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, ghosts, and then we're going to do the design thing. But ghosts first. Yeah, what is ghosts? How do you got into it?
Ghosts.
Why ghosts?
Ghosts is like, gosh, I wish I could use their formal language, but I don't remember it. But it's basically like a blog as a service in the sense that it provides, similar to how WordPress can help you create basically any type of site. Ghost focuses specifically on publishing, and they did that so that they can focus on it and do it super well. So the way that Ghost has built up their platform, it's a beautiful like interface, you know, similar to Medium, but it's on your own site. You can control it. They have different themes similar to like a WordPress application, and I've personally just found that it's like seamless.
What's the pricing?
So if you there's different approaches that they have where basically the actual platform itself is free. The way that they monetize is through hosting, right? So if you want to use the platform and you don't want to deal with hosting, your servers, they do all of that. And I think it's around $30 a month if you want to do that. So it's not on the cheap end, but they do it very well. Now, which I've done, I've set it up with my own server. I wrote a blog article if people are wondering how to do this. It really only takes maybe like 15 minutes to actually do.
If you know how to do it?
Well, if you follow the article as well. Of course, it's not super simple, but it's not as hard as I think most people would think. But if you are willing to, spin up your own droplet, then you can do it with DigitalOcean for $5. And then, like I said, the actual platform or interface for Ghost is free. So it depends which one you choose, but for the pricing, but I would... Yeah,
and it's like an open source thing? Or
that's another good thing. So John started the company, John O'Nolan started the company, I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but he wanted it to be this, it's been an open source project since he launched it, which I think is awesome. All the code is online, people can submit like a pull request, and it's all also a nonprofit actually. So it's set up in a way where it's sustainable from like a monetization perspective, but they're not looking to go build like $1 billion business so he can go and get rich. He really wanted to like solve a problem, which was like creating a great publishing platform. And he set it up now in a way where it's open source and a nonprofit. So it's kind of like feeding itself in a way that it's like kind of a sustainable company that's doing good for the community.
And is there something like that but Medium have it? Because it looks definitely, at first I thought it was a Medium thing, but it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's similar, like the actual interface is pretty similar, but no, Medium is like the opposite of that, right? Medium is a VC-backed company that scaled super quickly, got a bunch of users, and then realized, okay, we're just like bleeding cash. So how do we change that? Medium is added a paywall, right? Where it's still free to publish on Medium. And actually people make money through publishing there as well. But as a reader, it's a paywall, right? I think it's like $5 a month or something like that.
That's like a New York Times kind of situation.
And a lot of people have, there's differing opinions on it, but a lot of people aren't a fan of the paywall. And especially publishers who aren't a fan of, like, look, you're basically selling my content, right? Where it's like, if they want it to be... You can make it outside the paywall, but it basically gets no...
Yeah, and the problem is that if I would have signed up and I knew that from day one that there was a paywall, I would have been okay with it.
But they added it, right? Exactly. And that was the thing also where John with Ghost, which I really like, is that he set up from the beginning. He's like, we're setting up this company and we're going to make it profitable from the beginning. People are going to know how we make money. It's going to be very transparent. And that's going to like continue in that fashion versus Medium, as with many VC-backed companies, it's about growth, it's about hyper-growth until you reach a point where you're like, okay, we actually need to start turning a profit. And then in this case, they chose to do a paywall. People weren't happy with that because it kind of was like, uncovered out of nowhere, and people didn't like how it effectively was selling their content.
Do they get a piece of the pie, or? So
publishers do get a piece of the pie, but I think what some people are, so the publishers who do opt into, you can opt in or out of the paywall. People who opt in, I don't think are quite as upset, but people who really do just want their content to be free. Unfortunately, Medium used to, right, when everything was free, kind of help distribute good content as much as possible, right? Like get eyes on this stuff. Now they only do it for the stuff behind the paywall. So I think that's what some publishers are unhappy with.
Okay, mailing list. What do you use? Why?
I use MailChimp, but I think I'm in a newsletter kind of Telegram group where there have been different tools flying around, so I might switch. But for now, MailChimp, it's been, I know a lot of people have problems with MailChimp, but it's actually been completely fine for me. So, yeah. Okay,
well, why do you want to switch then?
Once you start building up your list, it tends to be more expensive. There's also just, I think, better options.
At what point?
I think it's at 2,000 subscribers.
Oh, then the free becomes...
Yes, and then past that, I think it scales up pretty quickly as well. So it's not as much about just purely the payment, but I just think there's other platforms that I've heard that let you customize your emails more effectively. MailChimp has a really bad mobile interface. I've heard a bunch of complaints. I haven't really run into them myself as much, but I kind of anticipate that to come.
Right, so once you hit 2,000, out you go.
Not necessarily, not necessarily. I just, like, I kind of anticipate, like, as I'm focusing more on my mailing list, MailChimp has been decent for me, but I just, like, am consistently hearing other publishers kind of run into these walls. So we'll see. We'll see if I run into them.
What are some of the issues?
Like I said, some people are really, like, struggling with mobile, like, actually getting your newsletter formatting the way that you want. Also, just like if you want to do anything behind a paywall, there's other tools like Substack and like, so I'm still figuring it out. I'm still at, like, I only launched my newsletter earlier this year, so I'm at the earlier stages of it.
You're killing it.
But yeah, it's going well, but I haven't put as much thought probably into like exactly what tooling I should use as I probably will end up thinking more about moving forward.
How do you see your newsletter as like a tool? Like what kind of, you know?
I mean, I think my newsletter is a way for me to, like, I write articles and most of them are more on the personal side, or at least like a first person, like, account of like what I'm researching or writing about. And I think my newsletter is kind of an extension of that for me to, like, share what I'm writing about in a more personal way, share what I added, like, this new part of it, which is like stumblings, which is like just things that I'm running into throughout the week, quotes that I like. So I've considered making my newsletter more general and less about like what I'm doing or what I'm seeing, but I think I actually like that it's like kind of like a channel for me to like interact with people. They know what's going on in my life. I hear back from a lot of people who are like, hey, I'm thinking of learning to code, or I'm, you know, applying for a remote job, or I really like this part of your newsletter. So I really like that it's kind of like this like very direct channel to share things with people.
Yeah, no, I just also got on the bandwagon and also used MailChimp. And yeah, just before that, it was just like an RSS feed. Yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, you get it. On Tuesday and Thursday, you would send it out. And it was like terrible. And now, yeah, I kind of like that I'm like not outsourcing all that newsfeed stuff to Facebook and taking it back into my own hands and getting to actually talk to people that have something to say.
Yeah, and I think it's also like a little bit of an accountability thing, because when I just have my blog, I could publish an article once every 3 months and no one, you know, no one's going to say anything. And even with the newsletter, they're not going to like email me being like, where's the newsletter? But I have this like, okay, I want to send it out weekly.
More internal. That's more internal. It's still internal.
Sure. But I still like, I think it's nice to have the newsletter as like a, okay, I need to like stay accountable. People want to see my stuff, hopefully, if they're, you know.
Well, but not on the timeline that you set for yourself.
I know. But I also, it's a nice way to
think about it.
Keep that accountability in place.
Right. Okay. You create a couple of projects. Oh wait, so blog first, photos. How the hell do you get these beautiful photos? Like
they're mostly all Unsplash. There's a couple that, so at least in the cover images, like 90+% of them are from Unsplash, and then the images within the articles I create myself most of the time. The illustrations.
Illustrator or Keynote?
No, Illustrator. Yeah, I took a random Udemy course. That one was actually so quick. I think it was like 4 to 8 hours of content. I don't remember, but I did it within 2 days. Just like powered through, and then now I know how to. I mean, I'm not an illustrator, but I know how to illustrate basic things, and I think it's nice because I kind of, as you maybe see in my articles, a lot of my kind of images, like I couldn't find that on Unsplash. Like it's a graph, or it's like kind of like a way of me communicating like what I'm thinking, and so I need to be able to create my own images.
Wait, which is the one that you created? Because the 5%.
So I'm talking about the ones like in the articles.
No, what about the cover?
So like the how to be great one, the one with that. Yeah, I made that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Whereas that one, like in that case, I didn't feel like I could find an image on Unsplash or elsewhere that could convey what I was looking for, so I created it. But at least for the cover images, most of the time, I feel like, especially because I keep those images pretty like conceptual, like high level, then I can find images on Unsplash. But when I can't, it's nice to be able to create them myself. Okay,
well, tell me about that image, like, because it looks a little bit more than basic Illustrator. It looks better.
Thanks.
So what's your process of like creating that? Because I know it's like, say there's a graph and then it's going up.
Yeah. I mean, it mostly is just like so I created that for in the article and then realized that I wanted to use it as the image. But that was like, I always do the images last. Like I go through the article, think about like what I'm trying to say, and then when I feel like what I'm trying to say can't be conveyed purely in words, then I'll go and create the image. So for that, I had already thought through the idea of like a continuous upward kind of series of steps, but the fact that you're like, you can only really see a certain like dimension outside of that. And so that was just like, I created that image just through kind of like processing that concept.
And colors wise? Try and error?
Kind of like we said before, like I don't have a color scheme that I normally tie to, but I literally just play around with gradients in Illustrator and see what fits.
That's great. Logos for your projects?
Again, pretty iterative. I just have like I create something and I tend to have like a vision of what I want it to be represented by. And as you'll see, most of my logos are very, very simple. So it's not like I have this like crazy vision that's coming out of nowhere. I try to keep them pretty simple and just...
Illustrator. 48 hours.
Illustrator or Photoshop, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you make your animations too?
No. So the one, are you talking about the
logo animation?
The logo animations that... Yeah. No, I don't. Well, I created the one for Unoya, which is just this 3 simple globes. But no, you're probably thinking of FeeMake. That one was created by a friend of mine, Alyssa. So she's like, I think she's 18, and she's very talented, and she actually like has created a bunch of those. So there's a group called Women Make, and she's part of that, and she's created many for not just my launches, but other people's launches, and she creates them super quickly. And she's kind of like in the same tone as what I was saying before, where I've asked her and others have asked her, like, how did you create this? Like, what was your thought process? And she also just kind of visualizes like things coming out, coming in, like, so anyway, she's the one who's created the animations. I don't know how to do that.
Okay. I was like, okay, well, she can design and then code and make 25, what am I doing? Okay, great. So actually I want to dive in a little bit about, most people wouldn't know just by looking at your bio, but you're actually a marketer by trade. You get paid for...
That's what I get paid for.
Right? Which you don't talk about on your bio, but I would like to dive into some of the marketing playbook of some of the launch, because you have 2 products a day, and then you have 1 golden kitty, which I don't know what it means. It sounds cool.
It's just a Product Hunt, which is like I guess you're familiar with Product Hunt. They do these golden kitty awards every year, and they've started doing them for what they call makers festivals. But it's kind of just this niche thing
how do they
So they normally do it, again, for the Makers Festivals. They'll have like specific categories. The one I won it in was for inclusion, and then people will create products for those categories, and then people will vote on them, and then if you win, you get a golden kitty.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about, I don't know how we should do this marketing playbook thing. Here's a couple entry points, then you can just pick. So we can talk all the way from choosing projects, and we can talk about how, when you choose the project at the start, what do you think about when you're doing the marketing stuff, and then like what goes in the way, and then we can talk about the tactical stuff of like, do you choose a certain date and time to do that, and then how do you blast the things out, and what kind of groups do you blast it to, and do you have a thunderclap sort of feature that everyone gets on the same day, right? But yeah, so just go ahead and yeah.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of choosing projects, the projects that I've built so far have been just things that I find interesting. So like things that I'm naturally have an affinity to. So I cared about women in tech. I created FeeMake. I really found untranslatable words super interesting. So I created Unoya. And same thing for the other projects. It's always just been things that I find personally interesting that I'm like, oh, I'd love to create some sort of project that like...
But do you also have a list of like 10 other things that, you prioritize this over the other?
I have a list of like 50 projects that I eventually want to make. But yeah, I prioritize like things that I personally really like actually feel drawn to, because I think it also feeds into my motivation, right? Like I have tried to create projects that I'm like, oh, I think this would be good for like the market, or like people will be drawn to this, but I'm not drawn to it, and I can never just like find the motivation to actually create them. So I think it's important to like, you know, obviously like depending if this is your job, maybe you need to evaluate things differently, but since my projects are for fun, then I gravitate towards like what I actually enjoy talking about, creating, etc. So that's how I choose projects. In terms of making them, like so far they've been pretty quick, because most of them are like not what I would call products, like more just like fun projects. So they only ever really they've taken me anywhere from like literally a day, because one of them was a 24-hour startup challenge, to maybe a couple months at the max. That was my first project that took a couple months. And then
you got better and faster.
Yeah.
Because you know how to do it now.
You know how to do it, and I also was just like less picky about things. Like when I was the first time around, you really think it's like gonna be like this, you know, this huge launch and everyone's gonna care, and often they maybe care, but it's like a lot of people, especially early on, including myself, focus so much on this concept of the launch, because it's like the end all be all. This is when it gets the most attention. This is going to be, you know, whether this project like dies or continues on. And really it's a lot of fake confidence that comes out of a launch, right? Because you get all this positive feedback, all these page views, and often it's not actually representative of whether something will survive past that. And so after the first launch, I kind of started to learn that, and I've learned it like more and more going forward. And I think it's important to just focus on like the viability of something in the long run. So I'm just less picky about things when I'm creating them at the outset, because I know if this is going to be something more long term, this is going to be iterative for like many months or years. So I'm just less picky about like the
So is that one of the things you look at now, like, you know, long-term viability?
Now, yes. None of the projects really that I've launched so far have been that, because those ones were launched super quickly and they were more just like projects. There's a project that I'm working on now, and it's very early stage, which is more long-term, where I can see it becoming like a product. I can see myself monetizing it. I can see it being built out for, you know, like many, many features over the next couple months or even years. So yes, now that's what I'm focusing on, because like I said, it's super nice to get like that launch feedback and get that dopamine hit, but it's not actually conducive to any sort of business or long-term strategy.
But would you say then you wouldn't launch then? Like,
oh, of course I'd launch, but...
Okay. How do you see launching now?
But now I see launching as more of like a springboard to something more long-term. So I also wouldn't necessarily do it right away. I probably in this case would... Harry Dry is a guy who does marketing examples. He's talked about this, and he did it very effectively with his... Harry Dry is his name. Harry, and then Dry, Dry. Okay. He creates he's done a bunch of things, but currently he's focusing on something called marketing examples, and it's a site with like kind of like very cool, more like new age, interesting marketing examples. And he, similar to me, had created a bunch of things in the past and launched them and got like this big spike, and then it died down and he realized like it's not viable. So with marketing examples, he actually created it, kind of looked for validation like in the product itself. He wasn't launching it immediately. He was like looking to see, is this actually getting traction on its own? Do people care about it? Am I creating something of value? And he did that for like multiple months before launching it, because then he actually had kind of like a user base. And so then when he launched it, the launch was actually much more effective as well. Oh. So now I think if I were to do that, if I were to launch, which I will launch more things in the future, I'll take more of that approach, where I'm just not going to just like throw this out the second I get an MVP. I'm going to like iterate, get users, see what is actually working, what's not. And then when I feel like I've created something like actually of value, then I'll launch it.
Interesting. But this is also because it is going to be more like a long-term project. Yeah. So will you say that for your fanmic and, you know, the rest?
Those ones, and I probably will have like random kind of like instantaneous projects that I'll make in a couple days or weeks. Yeah, those I'll like happily toss out there. But for something more long term, I want to be more like thoughtful about it.
Okay, and how does thoughtful look like? Right? Is it going to little groups in Reddit and one user at a time, very tactical. Can you try this out? Like, how does that look like?
I mean, I think you can approach it in a bunch of different ways. Like, I work in marketing, so you can like go the organic approach, like focus on content a lot. You can actually like there are maker communities where they're very open to like people launching and announcing things and getting feedback. So that's definitely one place that I would recommend for people. And then yeah, there's platforms like Twitter, Reddit, Hacker News. Like those are kind of like places that you can launch without like officially.
Is there specific launching? like groups, chats, hashtag, whatever, to people if you're launching stuff they could look into?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of Telegram chats. If you're a woman, Women Make is like a great platform for other makers. There's a couple other maker chats. There's like, I think, now I'm blanking on the actual names, but there's a bunch of, if you go on Telegram, there's quite a few chats that are dedicated to people making things. I also am part of WIP, like Work in Progress, which is a group of makers. That's a paid service, I guess. But then there's like a very similar free service called MakerLog, which a lot of people are part of as well. So I think there's a lot of places where people go. Indie Hackers is also, of course, huge for people who are making these things. Yeah. I recently responded to someone who was on Indie Hackers, who was kind of he was a little upset because he had been creating these things, and I think he launched and he didn't get the response that he was looking for. And I've gotten feedback from other people that they've experienced similar things. And I think what's really important is that if people do kind of want to be part of the maker community, that they don't just launch stuff and say, hey, look at my stuff, like, and not actually help other people. So I kind of explained to him how I've built up what I would call, like, what some people might call my following and stuff like that. And I've focused it around not just like, hey, check out my products or projects, but like consistently interacting, delivering value, opening up what I'm doing past just a launch. So
being a human?
Yes, being a human. Like people follow humans, not products or companies. And so I think that's really important for people. If they do choose to join these maker chats, like, don't just like come in, blast your launch, and then disappear.
Yeah, I got Seth Godin calls it the traveling huckster. You do that long enough, and you just realize that, hey, like that little trick thing might work one time, but once everybody's doing it, attention is scarce.
Exactly.
Cool. So that's a bit of ground rules for anybody who's engaging in this Telegram chat. So please don't destroy this great things that people make out, because they'll kick you out.
Yeah, well, and it's also just like in the same tune of things being more long term, like, don't just focus on the launch. Like, if you've created something of value, like, ask people questions about it, get people to try it out. Like, don't just blast like this launch message hoping that will like skyrocket you to like your product being successful. So like engage in those chats and actually like, help others, but also like get value out of them as well by asking questions and seeing like what people think, and just being a human. Like, this is not some like launch radar. It's like a chat for other makers to like interact and learn from each other.
Cool. So would you say after, being there and, chatting and, engaging and, do you collect this users and like when you launch, is there a way for you to communicate with them that you're launching? Can you help me do this if you think that the product is good or you actually got some value out of it? After, like, when you're launching to so a lot of, still the most common way is just email, right? Like just getting email subscribers from your product. I think that's really important. There's a couple other tools now where people can get live feedback on the page. What is it? Well, there's a bunch. So you can use Intercom for like more like customer service type stuff. I think Sentry is one where people can submit like actual like tickets and feedback. I might be wrong about the name, but there's different tools. So I don't currently, because I have my blog, which I love, and I have these like random projects, but I'm not really like working on extending those. But for my next product, I hope to like incorporate more of this stuff. Well, this is a good time to talk about it in case anybody wants to be subscriber or want to try beta.
Yeah, so it's called Upread, and it kind of like sprung out of my blog, because I launched my blog earlier this year. It went much better than I expected. Lots of people were reading it. And then there was all this stuff, and it's like now I have like a functioning blog. Like there was a bunch of things that I didn't know how to do, and I found there wasn't really the proper tooling for independent publishers. So a lot of this stuff for like large publications, they'll build it in-house. But some of the things that I started to do were like, okay, I'm going to advertise. Like, how do I advertise on my blog? How do I actually get the ads in there effectively? How do I actually create like a promote page where people can go to and purchase ads? And then for user feedback, how do I get user feedback effectively? The best thing currently is like for a blog is really to send out like a Typeform or a Google form. And I feel like there's just better, more native ways to get user feedback.
Not the content, but the UI, or what are you talking about?
No, and like in terms of topics, what people want to hear, what people want to read next, what they like, what they don't like. And I, for example, one of the very simple first features that I want to do is just have inline, like on the page, like the next 5 to 10 upcoming articles where people can upvote which ones they want to read next. There's no tool where you can do that currently, and it's very simple, but it's basically the way I've been labeling UpRead is like a toolbox for independent publishers. It's just things that right now there's tooling out there. You can send out a Google form, you can send out a Typeform, but they're not made for this purpose. And so I want to create a toolbox for independent publishers to be able to do all the things that these like larger publishers can do. They can advertise easily, they can get user feedback easily, they can just like have a better system to get feedback and build their publication.
Okay.
But for independents. And of course, some of the things that I'm building, like larger publishers can use, but I'm centering it more around someone like me who's building this from the get-go and doesn't really know what they're doing. So that's the product. And it's kind of like simple right now, but I have ideas in terms of like how it'll expand past the things that I just mentioned.
What kind of users, should write to you
if you have a blog. And most people have a blog, like a lot
that wants to have what's the few features that people
to extend their blog past just like whatever it is now, which is basically just like a page with text on it, right? If you want to engage with your readers more effectively, if you want to potentially advertise and don't know how to set that stuff up, if you want to monetize, that's like another step that I hope to add after that. Similar to Substack, but again for independent publishers and all kind of in one toolbox. So if you have a blog, then UpRead...
And wants to have those features that you talk about?
Yes, then upread.co is currently where the landing page is, and I'm collecting interest. But hopefully I've been putting off building it because of the recent career switch, but now that I've switched, I hope to at least have like an MVP out by, the next month or two.
You talk about when you were in chemical engineering, hated the thing, and then you want to dig yourself out of this place that you hate.
Well, so it was mostly, I was in consulting. I didn't necessarily hate consulting, but there was aspects of it where I just felt like it wasn't long-term sustainable. I wasn't doing what I loved. And I felt like I was building a career around one thing, and I didn't feel like that was like conducive to my happiness in the long term.
So what was the couple of aspects that made you think that?
It was a mix of two kind of sections. So one of them was purely just like, I was in Toronto, that's where I grew up. I wasn't happy there. I was commuting a lot. I was basically like living in a place and living a life that I was not happy with. So that was one aspect of it. But then also from the aspect of like what skills I was focusing on, what industry I was in, like the actual job itself was interesting. I learned a lot, but ultimately I was moving in a very corporate direction and into kind of like a very stereotypical like working your way up the ladder, which I realized very quickly was not what I wanted to do.
When you were in consulting, that being the job that a lot of people wanted, right? And I bet, I don't know if it's the thing that you wanted when you were in school.
So I did chemical engineering in school. Chemical engineering goes into two very typical jobs after. One is like working in oil and gas, and one of them is working basically in like some sort of chemical plant. So I knew I definitely didn't want to do that. And then the next most obvious option is that a lot of consulting firms hire engineers. And so a lot of people in prior years, like at the university I went to in engineering, went into consulting. So for me, that was the role I wanted, because I knew I didn't want to do oil and gas and like chemical processing. So I was pretty excited to go into consulting. And I did the job, and a lot of the work I did was pretty interesting, and I learned a lot. That's when I fell in love with spreadsheets, and I learned a lot that I've taken since then. But the actual dynamic of kind of climbing the ladder, working with clients that were very corporate, and I just felt myself kind of like working towards a future that wasn't what I really knew.
Okay, so first of all, we can all agree that the money is good.
The money can be good. I wasn't even making that much. I mean, I wasn't doing bad, but I wasn't there for the money. Okay. I wasn't killing it then.
but you were at least shifting from a place that you absolutely value-wise doesn't align to something that it might be good.
Yeah.
And actually, in fact, you think it was good. So like I just want to know the moment that like you realized that, like, whoa, this is not what I thought it was. And
yeah, I think it was, I don't know if there was one specific moment, but it was definitely early on. Like I started in this job in consulting, I think at the end of the summer. It was in August of 2015. And I think by around October, I was already looking for other jobs. And I think it was a mix of when I finally, it was a huge learning curve, so that was great when I was learning these new skills. But then when we'd create things or like create a deck and go to the client and present to them, hey, like this is how you can save millions of dollars, or this is how you can do X, Y, Z. They really liked the work we were doing, but that was a whole different political game, right? Where they were like, oh, but I'm worried about what the CMO is going to say, or like, we can't do this because of whatever's happening at the company. Like we were working with like, Fortune 50 companies. And so there was a lot of like kind of enterprise dynamics going on. And I just would get frustrated, to be honest, because I would create, I would spend like many, many hours finding these insights, and then they would be happy with them, but not use them. And I just felt like this doesn't make any sense.
And they'll tell you like right up front, like in the meeting that they love it, but in a sense, I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, this is helpful, but we're basically just spending our marketing dollar or our consulting dollars.
Well, how many times did you do that?
Like, I mean, it didn't always happen, but it happened enough where I was just kind of like, this doesn't make sense,
well,
right?
How does it feel to you the first time versus the third time?
I mean, by the end, it's like after a while, you expect it, right? You kind of go in there with like wide eyes, and you're like, I'm going to change the world. I'm working with these huge companies, and I'm going to find these insights, and I'm going to like help them do these amazing things. And then you kind of realize that there's just all these layers that prevent you from doing that. And so that's why whenever I moved to a new role, I knew I wanted to work with smaller companies where I really could like make decisions. I could like find insights that could impact the company or impact what I was doing, and didn't have all these like walls to run through. So it definitely got better over time psychologically because you expected it, but that didn't make it much better.
Also, the first time was real hard.
I'm not saying it wasn't like that hard. Easier. I wasn't like having like a meltdown after, but I was just kind of like, this doesn't make any sense. I just put in all this work, and it's not going, and it's not going anywhere. So it was more just like a conflict of like, I don't understand. Not that I'm upset, but just like, this shouldn't be how this works, right? And I shouldn't be spending my time doing this.
But they did explain to you why they didn't want to implement it.
I mean, normally they would say like vaguely, like this doesn't, this person's running a project that's similar, maybe it will seem like we're competing against it, or we have this other mandate which doesn't make sense, but it's from the top, like classic corporate speak. But they would normally give you some degree of understanding, but it wouldn't always like make sense from a fundamental perspective.
Right. Okay. So And then there's a couple more decks that you made, and now you expect this. But instead of finding solutions that are more within their scope of maybe 5%, not a big 20% change, maybe a 1% change, you still suggested the 20% stuff, and you still got shot down.
It's not always about the fact that like they would shut stuff down. It's just there were just so many layers, and it's not specifically the firm I worked at or the companies we worked with. It's just a function of large companies that most of the time when you you propose something new, it needs to go through so many layers of approvals or like walls basically that you need to run through to get something to work. And I just felt like my time and effort could be translated into something much more impactful outside of that structure.
Got it. Okay, and then remote work came into the picture. But before jumping off the cliff, you have already spent weeks and weekends and weeknights learning, equipping yourself with new skills. Yeah. So tell me about the process of that. Yeah. If someone would be in your situation, you go back to Steph again, right? Yeah. They don't know all this options. What do they need to know? Go.
So like I said, I started in August in that role, and by I think around October I decided this isn't fully right for me, but I knew I wanted to be thoughtful and not just quit and not have a job. This is my first job out of university. From the point of view of it being a good job, it was a good job. It was a good thing to put on my resume. It potentially had a very nice career path. So I wanted to be mindful of that and not just drop it and be see you later. So I started learning everything I could on weekends and weeknights after work. I learned a lot of digital marketing, so SEO, paid marketing and stuff, social media, and just started looking online, where are the remote job boards, applied to them, got a couple freelance gigs. I think at one point I was actually doing 3 or 4 part-time.
Wait, where do you learn and what are the job boards?
The main job boards I would recommend were the same ones I used back then, which are Remote OK.
Not recommend, because that's important.
There's a lot, right? So the 2 job boards I still recommend are Remote OK and FlexJobs. Remote OK is free, so that's one that anyone can go to. FlexJobs is great. It's paid though, but it's really good for because they curate these jobs. It's a paid platform. The money goes to find people, to find remote jobs, but also validate them and say these are legitimate remote jobs. So I found quite a few jobs on FlexJobs. Most of the jobs that I did throughout the year that were remote were through FlexJobs. So I'd recommend FlexJobs. And I just went into it with an open mentality of I'll do this. I'll do a trial. I'll do.
Wait, what about Upwork and all this other stuff?
I would stick to remote job boards because.
Okay, why?
Because they're built for people who are open to hiring remotely. Upwork and of course these other talent platforms. I think there's just a mismatch of expectations, and there's also a mismatch of often people are looking for people to do extremely cheap, gig economy work that's a one-off, whereas I was looking for a job, right? A job, a sustainable position. And I did some part-time stuff. I did some stuff that didn't last, but all the things that I was doing were for companies that were hiring remote workers in some capacity. And I was doing a part-time or hourly gig for
Oh wow. So okay, I thought you were doing gig stuff. No, you were.
No, I was doing I had some of it was more gig-esque. There was one position that was an online researcher where you could kind of you could kind of go on the platform when you wanted to. So that was more gig economy style. But it was never I never used Upwork. I never used Gigster or Fiverr or anything like that. I never, because it also takes so much work to apply to positions on those platforms. So I wanted work that I could just do. I could do when I had the time because I was doing a full-time job. So yeah, I was just trying to get as much remote work experience under my belt. I wasn't doing it in a super intentional way, but now that I look back, it worked to just try to get as much experience under my belt so that finally when there was a role, which ended up being TopTal, that made sense, I had all this remote experience across a bunch of different areas under my belt. So I really was just experimenting. My North Star, what I was trying to achieve was just find a remote job, but I tested the waters a little bit, so I saw, like, I wasn't going to jump for, like, the first remote role that I found because I didn't want to just, like, give up my career in, like, to be able to work remotely. I wanted to have both.
Right. And I do not know how you do it, but it sounds like very tiring. And most of my consultant friends work very late.
Yeah,
so
I was definitely working. It was definitely like 60+ hour weeks.
So you knock off what, 7, and then from 7 to 11 you were there's commute, and then
so my average day back then was wake up 7:30ish, leave the house by 8. Get into work by like 9:15. I was always a little late, and then stay. That office had kind of like an unwritten rule, like as many, I guess, corporate firms have, where no one ever left before 6, and on average, I think we'd probably leave around 7. But some nights we'd stay till 11. Some nights we'd leave at 6:30 or whatever. But yeah, it was a lot of like leave around 7, get home around 8, have maybe like 2 to 3 hours of time to work, and then do the same thing again. And then weekends is when I really got a lot more work done outside of that job.
Oh, okay. And okay. The digital marketing stuff didn't actually end up being like what you do with the research stuff.
So that year I did many roles. I did an SEO focused role. I did a social media focused role. I did this like online research focused role. I'm probably forgetting a couple. Like I was doing a bunch of stuff
with different
companies, not all at the same time, although some of them did overlap. But it's because I tried certain things and realized like, okay, social media is cool, but I wouldn't want to be doing like social media as my full-time job.
Why?
Same thing. Well, it wasn't my like ideal position or like skill set that I wanted to pursue.
Okay.
And so I tried different things out. Same thing with like online research. I liked it. I was relatively good at it, but like, do I want that as my full-time job? Probably not. So that was cool to experience.
No, I feel that you're so thoughtful about thinking about the jobs that you take and the skills you view.
Important because I think that's actually like a very underrated thing that people consider. People are like often reach for a job that they think is good enough, but I think you spend most of your life working. You should be in roles that are very like conducive to your happiness, your like learning, your success in the future. And people should be, that's the thing that people should be extremely thoughtful about. Like relationships and work are what you spend your most time on. So you should be extremely thoughtful about both of those things.
Well, how do you think about like the work piece? Like, say for example, you're not in this career, right? Or coding, whatever. Like what would be the other thing, like plan B?
It's a good question because I'm one of those people who I honestly feel like I could have done many things and still like I'm unsure what I'll evolve into. But I think I like doing things like that are broad in the sense that they're dynamic, right? So online research, for example, that wasn't really a fit because you're doing the same thing consistently. It's more of like a plug and play, like here's your assignment, now you go complete it. I like problem solving, and I know that's broad, but like the reason that I fell into like more of a growth digital marketing type role is because, I mean, that first year and a half at TopTal where I was in that growth role was one of the periods of my life where I learned the most, at least from a skill set perspective, because we were given the vague-ish but clear mandate, you need to grow client revenue. And we did that, but there was no, this is exactly how you need to do it, right? This is your mandate, go figure it out. And I had so much fun because we experimented, we like used data, and just like we accomplished it, right? Like we did grow the company an extreme amount during that time period. And so I like roles that give you very clear outcomes, but give you the autonomy to figure out how you get there. And so again, I feel like there's probably other roles. It doesn't necessarily need to be digital marketing, but I optimize for roles where I can continuously problem solve, learn new things, and kind of like figure things out on my own without being like prescribed how to do it.
So I want to quickly touch about your slow travel thing, because I feel that there's something there that everyone phases in the same thing that you do, and I think there's wisdom to be derived from there. But tell me about, remote working and how this is so great, and what changes, or how do you feel internally to initiate the change?
Yeah, so I've been working remotely for the last 3 years, and it's been, for me, and I say for me because it's not for everyone, one of the best things that I've kind of incorporated into my life. The reason that I find it so great is because it allows me to do so much more. I feel like it's an enabler, which a lot of people don't understand. So the one thing to really emphasize here is that remote work is like glamorized, or it's like it's put on a pedestal by many people as this like dream world, dream life, whatever. And I think a lot of people go into it and realize that's not what it is. You're still like, I'm still working full time. I'm living in, places that I want and have a more flexible lifestyle, but it's not this dream life. So that's something really important to point out.
I want to know your story.
But once you get past that, so some people get into it and they imagine it like that. But then I think what's actually even more like empowering about the lifestyle is really it allows you to like design the life that you want. And so I'm able to like set my own schedule. I'm able to live exactly where we're in Bali right now, right? Like I live where I want. I live how I want. I have the autonomy to like work when, from where. And I just think it has enabled me to like build the life. Like really like if you imagine your life from the ground up, remote work kind of like sets that slate clean. And then you can build it. And the thing that I think people find hard sometimes about remote work is that they have to build it, right? And they don't realize that. They expect that they start working remotely and that, it's just going to, like, their life is going to be better automatically. But it actually takes a lot more work to be, like, intentional about this is how I'm going to spend my time. This is how I'm going to keep myself accountable. These are the things that I'm going to work on because I have the time. But if you kind of, like, embrace that and you're like, oh, now I have this, like, opportunity to literally design my life from the ground up. I think it's super
I think you
empowering.
Speak from experience, and what I'm trying to get to is what is the thing that when you started remote working, and and this is the set of things that everyone talks about, there's this whole thing that
so right. I mean everyone, so when, including me, when you first start working remotely, you focus on mostly this concept of location, right? Because like you don't focus on some of the things I'll talk about in a second, but you mostly focus on, okay, I'm free, right? I am no longer tied to a desk. I'm no longer tied to this one city. And you go a little bit crazy, most people, including me, in the sense where you're like, I'm going to maximize this. I'm going to maximize the fact that I can be absolutely anywhere, and I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to see all the sites. And I did that in my first year to 2 years. I traveled to over 30 countries across like almost every continent and was just constantly on the move. But that's not sustainable or even that fulfilling, just checking off countries.
Why?
On your... Well, I mean, happiness doesn't come from like just checking things off a list. Or
because people do feel that.
People think that, right? But then like once you start doing those things, you're like, oh, happiness comes from like doing fulfilling things, like learning new skills, building up, things of value, building relationships. Like happiness comes from building things in different forms. But when you're effectively just like moving around and checking boxes, you're not building anything. You're just ticking off things that you thought would make you happy and don't. And that's the thing, when you move around so much, a lot of nomads, especially when they do it for the first year or two, myself included, feel unfulfilled because they think they'll find happiness in hopping around quickly and seeing so many things and just like kind of getting invested in this like attention economy. And really what makes people happy is building things, like again, building relationships, building things of value, learning things. And you don't do that when you're constantly on the move. So what most nomads, including myself, start to do is they go crazy and they realize, wow, I've spent a year or two and I don't feel fulfilled. I haven't really advanced myself in my career or in my personal growth, or whatever, so I'm going to slow down. I want community. That's what most people recognize, is they want some form of like routine. But in addition to the routine, they want to start building up some of these things, especially these relationships with people. So then they slow down. And some people fully slow down. Some people actually stop nomading. Some people choose to kind of like adhere to one location. Some people move to places like Bali permanently. Some people do what I would typically call slow nomad, where they still move around, but maybe they spend 3 months somewhere, 6 months somewhere, and they tend to focus specifically on more like digital nomad centric locations like Bali or Chiang Mai or Lisbon. So there's different ways to go about it, but I think the central theme is that people realize just like hopping around and being like as nomadic as possible is not actually that fulfilling.
I'm gonna dig a little bit over here. You realize that you didn't like the whole chemical engineering thing, right? And then that took 2 months really quickly for you to figure that out. But this nomad thing was 1.5 to 2 years. So, but I assume that little things pop up, and then like, but what were some of the little things that pop up that made you realize that might not be the thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, it took me around a year or so, because I was traveling around and seeing the world. And I think a couple things. One is, by that 1.5 years or so, I had been in that role at the company for 1.5 years. And I didn't feel like that I had passed that I had an amazing initial growth learning phase. And then after that, it started to slow down. And I looked back on the 1.5 years, like where I was then, and I was like, in the last 6 months to a year, I don't feel like I've accomplished as much. Like, I'm not learning, and then I've just been hopping around, so I haven't really been forming like relationships, both like romantically and also like with friendships, right? Because you're just constantly moving around. I didn't feel like I had a routine, and I just felt like I was chasing something that wasn't actually like worth being chased anymore, right? Like, I'd seen it, I'd lived it, and I recognized that really wasn't what I wanted to optimize towards. And around the same time, I think one thing that was really impactful is that I came to Bali for the first time in, I think, December 2017. And when I came here, it was the first time where I kind of like immediately kind of got pulled into a community, because the community here is really good. I was meeting people every day. I was meeting like-minded people building businesses, people that were inspiring me. And prior to that, when I was just like hopping around Europe and South America and like all these other places, I would meet someone for like a day and then like never speak to them again. But I was here for, I think, around 1.5 months, and I had already like built up the relationships where I was like, I want to come back here. So now Bali's been kind of like this pseudo home for me, where I come back for a couple months, maybe leave for a couple months, but I just keep coming back because I'm like longing for that community. So I think that also was like a pretty pivotal point when I first came here, and kind of like just got brought into the community here and was like, oh, this is what I want moving forward.
Right. And do you see that, because I think there's a theme that I see through this is the speed and velocity that you learn and you want to experience life, and there is almost a hard stopping point whenever that's not happening, you realize that there was something that is missing. And do you think like the speed and velocity will continue down the road? Is that a thing?
I think, in terms of just traveling, like I still travel more than I think most people, and I do plan to continue to travel. Like every time I'm stuck somewhere for a couple months, like I do want to like almost hit refresh and like go somewhere new. But I don't think I'll ever go back into like that speed phase again. It's very, I think I wrote about this in one of my articles. It's very hard to focus on like more than a couple things at a time, right? And so right now, like my learning / like working on projects, learning to code, like that's one area of my life I care a lot about and have no plans on like deprioritizing. Another one is my job. I still love working and the companies that I'm at, and so that's another one. There's not that much room for that much else. And like I have relationships, I have family, I have things that I care about, and every time I do this speed travel thing, which every so often comes up, like even in June, I had a couple conferences and I was kind of for a couple weeks speed traveling. It just kind of hinders my ability to do the things that I care about more. And so sure, I'll continue to travel, but I don't think I'll ever go back to that like long period of speed travel.
Okay, this is gonna take a left turn. Because you half Asian and half white, what does mom say about not being with mom?
She's cool. My mom is awesome. She is super supportive of she's always been just like, do what makes you happy. I think both my parents would like selfishly like me to be at home more, but I selfishly make the decision not to be. But no, it's been like great. And every time I come home, like I stay at home, like if I'm home for a couple weeks or whatever. So I do spend actually like a decent amount of time with them throughout the year. But no, they're super, super cool. I think at first they didn't really get it. They were like, what do you, like, because remote work, when I first started working remotely, it wasn't as popular as it is now. So I think they weren't like, does she have a real job? Like, what's she doing? But now I think they get it and they're super supportive.
All right, Steph Smith, thank you for your time.
Nice. Thank you.
The chatting. I mean, I don't have to tow you up anymore. I mean, we have covered a lot of like tactical stuff, and we've given enough people to look at notes and goals and all that good stuff. I know. Yeah, and if people want to know more about you and what you do, they sign up for your blog and read stuff that you write about and leadership and all that good stuff. We didn't even cover half the thing that I want to talk about. Well, it's good grounds for round 2.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thanks.